the need for skills training, and the need to better understand how to take care of our resources. And that led us in 2017 to write a proposal to the Global Environment Fund, the Global Environment Facility Small Grants Program. And we were able to get a project funded. And in fact, it led to two projects, a project that we lead and the project that the Jamaica Organic Agricultural Movements,
that's right.
And yes, so they also have a project working with Rio Grande Valley communities. And in our project, we have stretched to include Charlestown and Scotts Hall. And the project really sought to do a number of assessments, the status of forest resources, particularly within the national park nearby. You know, is the forest growing back? Is it declining? And we found that a big challenge was bamboo and the overgrowth of bamboo. So that sort of is saying to us, you know, then what can we do? And in our last week's meeting with the Maroon Communities Committee of the Blue and John Crow Mountains, the issue of bamboo was one that came up. You know, how can we control it, manage it, use it for other economic purposes? Because what we're hearing is that plans nationally are not to use our existing bamboo, but to import some other kind. And people are saying, but we have all of this bamboo here and it's taking over the forest, it's taking over the mountainside. It's resulting in fires that spread because a fire in bamboo is really something terrible, because of course it just explodes and you have those leaves that act as tinder. So our assessments have led us to make a number of recommendations and to help to identify projects that we can implement working with Maroon communities. Another one that came up was the issue of the Jamaican Hutia, the Coney, or as Maroon people would say, the Grazie. And we did a one-year study. We have presented it at NEPO and we're going to present it tomorrow evening in Moortown. So we did questionnaires amongst people. We also were out in the field gathering data, and tomorrow evening we're going to be in Moortown presenting to the community so that they have a direct impact. So where do we go from here? What do we do? So those are just some examples. Another project that I want to mention that has come out of this relationship is the South Africa-Jamaica Research Project. It's kind of ground to a bit of a halt at the moment because of COVID, but we have had visits from University of Zululand, where a professor there with one student in particular is looking at comparison of the relationship between protected area managers in the Zululand province of South Africa and indigenous communities with the relationship that we have in the Blue and John Crow Mountains National Park with our Maroon communities. And I look forward to the paper that hopefully will be presented maybe next International Maroon Conference. They were present last year and presented, but that will be quite interesting. And also because I want to facilitate that relationship. We usually think of West Africa, and of course that's sort of the immediate home of our ancestors, but visiting South Africa and Zululand in particular, it was just amazing how many similarities, and they were fascinated to learn about Maroon communities as well. And I think it's an opportunity for us to link indigenous peoples across the world. And I know that's something also that the International Maroon Conference seeks to do. And I think it's important because there's so much that we can learn from each other and share with each other. So that kind of sums up, you know, what JCDT tries to do in managing the Blue and John Crow Mountains National Park and World Heritage Site, which the Maroon peoples were so integral in the history of and in the inscription. And so those are just some examples of how we seek to ensure the involvement and giving voice to the Maroon peoples in the management of the site.
Oh, Dr. Otuokon, this is so fascinating. This is so absolutely wonderful. You know, there's a point you were making there about fire that lends itself to a kind of understanding that we don't get on an everyday basis. And this is, again, the concept of indigeneity and how it addresses issues like that. Fire is sacred for indigenous peoples. Fire is sacred. You just don't go around a place and light a fire.
Yeah.
And you don't light fire to destroy unwittingly and wantonly. You know, it's something used with a purpose, with great skill.
Yeah.
In indigenous communities, you have fire keepers. These are the people who are the handlers or who would go out and make fires for specific purposes, monitor that fire. They could even speak to the fire because they know the spirit and the energy of the fire. Remember, part of indigeneity is accepting that everything around us has spirit because the spirit of the great creator is in everything he created. Very simple principles. And so when you talk about us having, you know, these issues with fires, it just shows how far we have walked from these teachings.
Away
so
from those things. Yes.
So necessary, not just to celebrate the ancestors in a day like this, but to realize that the celebration of ancestors is a continuing process, is an everydaying of the teachings and the learnings that we need to do to make sure we are who we say we are. We cannot claim to be Maroon and indigenous and all these things and just play with fire. It doesn't make sense. And this applies to many of the other areas you mentioned. The same thing with water. Water is also sacred. All of these energies are sacred energies. They're treated, we coexist. Our existence is no more important than theirs, and theirs no more important than us. We have to coexist. We have to have that powerful relationship. So I really want to thank you. I wanted to ask, in some settings, for example, if somebody decides to really go and demolish a protected area, does the JCTC have legal recourse?
Yeah, good question. So what our challenge really is that we have limited legal capacity. You know, nobody really on staff. We have board members who are have legal backgrounds that we can ask perhaps for advice, or I might call on a Marcus Goff or something, but we don't have. I see him there, so we can call, you know, on people like that. But then to actually be able to implement, and we usually have to call on the forest officers, the NEPA officers, and so on. The rangers, our rangers really only have jurisdiction within the national park. And oftentimes where we find the negative environmental activities is often outside the national park, but we are concerned about those areas too. I mean, that's where we live, and people need to take better care of our environment. But I really think, and I think it's a good area for us to think about working on, and you know, trying to revitalize and some of that heritage where we have a better understanding of the way that our foreparents would have lived with nature, because I think that we have lost a lot of that.
Indeed.
Colonization and so on, and a lot of the approaches, some of the Western approaches that we're taking are just not I don't even know that they are necessarily working out for
they're not.
Civilization and development. You know, we're seeing now that they're not really working.
Yes, the evidence is very clear. You look at the environment, you look at climate change, you look at global warming. I mean, we look at the haze that's over this country today.
Yeah. So I think that there is so much that we can learn from the Maroon people who have really made such a great effort to preserve that heritage, but so much more still needs to be done even within Maroon communities, and then spreading out to other Jamaican communities.
That's
because
correct.
You know, we're coming from the same place. It's just that something different happened to the two groups when they arrived here.
And it's so important to teach each Jamaican that this is a responsibility.
I think so.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Uncle Mike is here and he would like to pose a question because we're going to be closing out with you shortly, but we will allow him a question.
Yes. Hi, Mike.
Good afternoon again, Susan. You were just questioned and speaking about fire and the importance of knowledge of fire. I guess the flip side, or my question would be also regarding water.
Yes.
Because I think right now, the conservation and management of water resource inside of Jamaica is going to be a challenge. It already is, but it is going to become more so. I just wanted to get your, does your organization have any responsibility regarding, management of water? The rivers up in the Blue and Jonquil Mountain, Mami River, Hope River, that's a very important catchment and supply for the municipal Jamaica. So the question is really around, retaining a strong management of our water resource in the Blue and Jonquil Mountains, the Cockpit Country, and also another important sacred site, which is also the Goat Island.
Yes.
So a big struggle was put up for the Goat Islands, and it's, I think, also important that we don't forget the importance of Goat Island as a sacred space. And, keep an eye on the water resource.
Water resources. Well, the first thing is that, of course, the water is connected to the forest. If we don't have the forest, you're not going to have the water.
Indeed.
So the reality is there's not much that we can do necessarily about the rain and so on. But first thing is to protect our forests. And that's what a lot of people don't understand. Oh, this vast national park, why we don't just open it up and, allow various kind of development. But most of this development is going to entail clearing forests. And we believe that we need to maintain a certain amount of forest just in its natural condition. And that's the reason we have the World Heritage Site inscription. Beyond that, though, I think we have to work with local communities because, for example, Mike mentioned Hope River, and a lot of the Hope River watershed is actually urbanized and, residential communities and so on. And unfortunately, a lot of the forest cover has been lost. Yes. So I think if there's a need to work together with communities on their private lands to restore more forest and for people to appreciate trees,
indeed.
People are cutting down trees left, right,
That's right. Center. It's a kind of insanity, isn't it?
It is. And then we complain how we're hot, we don't have any shade, we don't have any fruit, we don't have anything to eat.
Yes. Dr. Otuokon, my thanks, my gratitude. We are so grateful that you found it necessary, found it sufficiently important to come and have this conversation with us. As we keep reaching out to our fellow Jamaicans, our neighbors, speak to each other. I beg everyone who is listening, speak to each other about the responsibility protection of the earth. And on that note, Colonel Farron Williams, are you in the house? On that note, while we...
A different name. So people inside. Is Dr. Susan still on? I have a question.
I'm still on, yes.
Somebody sent me a question, and the question is, I understand that Rastafari and Tainos are also indigenous people of Jamaica. Could you care to comment on it?
That's not really my area of specialization.
I can comment on that. I can comment on that.
Yes, please.
So the Tainos we know were among the earliest inhabitants of this space. The name Taino was actually developed in this space for a group of people who, through a number of waves of migration, came down. And one story is that they came through from the Amazon area through the Orinoco and eventually ended up in the Caribbean and places like Jamaica. There are some other stories, there are many stories about how people get to where they get to. So by the definition of indigenous that is used by United Nations, they are indigenous to this place. The Rastafarian is a culture. Rastafari and Rastafarianism is a culture that has developed within the Caribbean space, which by the definition of the UN also makes it indigenous to the Jamaican space. And so, yes, these people are indigenous peoples. We're grateful for all the questions. We're grateful for the participation of the audience. I want now to go back. You see, everything happens in its own divine order. This is the perfect place now for the Mother Earth song by Danielle. Again, as we said, Danielle is a native of Kentucky, but has been, she grew up under the influence of the Lakota people. So her music represents their teachings. Again, Dr. Otuokon was talking about the earth. All the spaces, she was talking about earth spaces. Remember, earth is land and water. So Michael also brought in about the water. This song, I think, shares so beautifully about the earth. Franco, let's have the nail.
I walk your sacred ground, healing waters I have found, rivers flowing strong and deep, wash away your